Today I'm doing a quick tutorial on how to replicate the SH-101 part of Aphex's song I'm Self-Employed. You just heard how it sounds, so let's get right into how I made it. The program in the sequence is actually a little bit kind of complicated. Every single step is used out of the 64, but I'll just quickly show you what it is, and then I will probably just post it maybe right here on the screen so you can copy it in. But basically you want the BPM set to 120 and the pattern length, so hit shift and last, set to 64 and go into step mode. We have a E5, E5, rest, E5, D sharp 6, D sharp 6, rest, D sharp 6, E5, 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 D sharp 6, D sharp 6, D sharp 6, and you might notice that is kind of the pattern here. We then have a G sharp 5, G sharp 5, rest, G sharp 5, F sharp 6, F sharp 6, rest, F sharp 6, G sharp 5, G sharp 5, rest, G sharp 5, F sharp 6, F sharp 6, rest here, another F sharp 6, and then F sharp 5, F sharp 5, rest, F sharp 5, F E6, then another E6. And this is how you kind of get that like bouncy pattern. It's bouncing between the different octaves, even though it's really only a couple different notes. And you can just program that in. I would actually recommend programming it in using the step mode, as I've shown in different videos. You could program it in 1 by 1 steps, but I just personally find it easier to program a long pattern in like this using the step mode edit. All right, let's actually make the patch now. I'm going to initialize this patch. All right, we're back to, let's set this back up to 120. And then I'm going to reload the, not the sound, but the sequence. And basically what that allows me to do is play it so as I'm making adjustments, you'll be able to hear very obviously kind of what changes are happening. So we're going to want to immediately set the oscillator range to 64. You already can start hearing it shape up immediately. We're going to set the pulse amount to 255, the sub to 0. We're going to put the saw pretty high. You don't have to put it all the way up to 255, but might as well. You can also play around with that. I have the noise at 0. You're going to want to set the pulse width amount. Let's put it right around 101. And then we're going to set pulse width modulation source to manual, which means you get to really manually control it instead of having the envelope or the LFO control it. All right, so we're then going to adjust the tuning and just put that a little bit flat. That actually is already, I just have it down 1. You don't have to do this, I just think it sounds ever so slightly more accurate to the song. Anyway, let's actually, one thing I'm forgetting, as you can notice, this is just going through the same 16 steps. Need to upgrade that to the all 64 steps. Moving on to the filter, we're going to want to set the frequency to right around 178, let's say. The resonance pretty high in the 160s. Keyboard filtering, we're going to want to put all the way up. Actually lower the filter frequency just a little bit more. And we're going to set LFO modulation all the way up to like 180. And let's just move over to the LFO speed first. Let's actually turn this kind of down in the 80s, but you can play with it as you are kind of progressing, speed it up, slow it down, and whatnot. And then you're going to want that to be the random source. You'll hear that actually sounds a lot better than if it's following some sort of pattern, because then it's just making these sort of random fluctuations in filter, which give it very acidy sort of sound. All right, let's move on to the envelope. We're going to want to set the attack somewhere between 15 and 25, I'd say. Let's just put it right around 20. Decay, let's set that as 128. Sustain, we're put it right around 80. Once again, while you're sort of performing it and jamming with this sort of sound, modify this as much as you want. This is just to get you pretty close. We're then going to set the release to 135. And you might notice, hey, it sounds totally different. That's because our tails are actually running into each other because we're still in poly mode. If you haven't watched my video on the different voice modes, I'd highly recommend it. I cover all of the different modes in the Roland S-1. And basically, we're going to want this one to be in mono mode so that the tails are being cut off. So these release tails are being cut off. We're then going to, I do turn on portamento as I'm performing it, but it was at a very low amount. It was like 4 or 5, so it's kind of somewhat not noticeable. And I would actually just leave it off. I also use a very small amount of hall reverb. Let's put it in about 100. This might actually already be set up. No, okay. I'm gonna want hall 2 reverb. Time pretty fast. Let's say around 90. Pre-delay, we're gonna want all the way up to 100. Low cut, we're gonna want that right around 400, but you can kind of mess around with this and see what you like. Then the high cut, I'm gonna put it right around 10K, and then the density all the way up to 10, which for most things is where I leave density. I also threw on a bit of delay in there. That's not strictly true to the original patch, but I do kind of think a very cut back delay. Let's put it in the 60s. Then let's go and set the levels, or the low cut. I'm gonna cut a lot of it off. Let's put it right around 500, and then the high cut, we're gonna be cutting down to 1.25K. And that way, you do get that delay, but it's not taking over their initial sound. Okay, so let's actually back this back up to right around 170. And you can pretty much hear how the song goes, and I hope it sounds pretty similar to the original. I'm sure it's not exact, but and as you increase that rate, it's just going to get more kind of squelchy and random. You can actually bring that up quite high. I'd probably keep it under like 220. See, it's a little crazy there. But even right around like 190, you get a very cool effect where it's kind of jumping around, especially as these notes are kind of jumping back and forth between octaves. It kind of creates a lot of interesting sounds. You can actually mess around with all these and get all sorts of sounds going on. So yeah, that's the I'm Self-Employed patch on the Roland S-1. If you like what I do, please check out some of my other videos. Feel free to check out my Patreon if you want to support me there. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice one.
Thank you.